Hello, today we're going to be talking about the Crusades. Just a note before we begin, when you're taking notes, you only have to have the main bullets, not the indented ones. For example, we want to know that the Seljuk Turks had conquered the Abbasid Empire and that Jerusalem was one of those places. However, you're not going to need to write down why Jerusalem was important to each of the monotheistic religions, just that it was important to the monotheistic religion. As I said, they were talking about the Crusades, which is a gigantic topic, and we're going to do our best to condense it in a short period of time. As I was saying, we have a group called Seljuk Turks conquering the Abbasids, and we discussed them at the beginning of the year. And you need to remember that these guys were nomadic um, groups that were ferocious in battle. They wound up devastating everyone they came in contact with. Now, in this conquest, as we can see over here, they start going and encroaching upon Byzantine territory. We know the Abbasid Caliphate had conquered much of the Byzantine land, but as the Seljuks grow and grow, they're going to conquer more of it. Now, Jerusalem was the city that they conquered. Now, Jerusalem is going to be incredibly important to each of the monotheistic faiths for various reasons. It was the capital for the Jews. Jesus, of course, was massacred during the crucifixion there. And even Muslims have the night journey there. Now, after the Seljuks come, things change. Before the Seljuks, people lived in Jerusalem in relative peace and harmony. We see in the picture below that we see there were Christian sections, Jewish sections, and Islamic sections. Well, after the Celtics come, they just go ahead and massacre 3,000 Christians. Now, this is unfortunately going to set up a tit for tat situation where things are going to get progressively worse for people living there as different faiths exert their dominance. So let's take a look at this. Now, the Byzantine Emperor Alexis Comnenus I goes and says, I need help against the Seljuk Turks. We need to get Jerusalem back from the infidel. Now, infidel was a term for anyone who wasn't of their belief. So, for example, Christians would call Jews and Muslims infidels, or Muslims would call Christians and Jews infidels. Now, the Byzantine emperor frames this in a way that the Pope could listen to, saying, Christians are coming and visiting these holy sites where Jesus walked. Don't let them be killed along the way. Don't let them be robbed. So we have a situation where the Byzantine emperor is tugging on the Pope's heartstrings, trying to get him to get the people to come. But why are people actually going to do this? Because as we know, unfortunately, people aren't always the most helpful to people out of the kindness of their own hearts. Well, first off is land and money, which is often a determining factor for a lot of people for a lot of things. We have to realize that times were different back then. At this time period, the law of primogeniture, where only the firstborn son was going to inherit land. So if you're a girl, sorry, tough luck. Hopefully you marry someone who has land. If you're a second-born son, sorry. This is actually how we get those amounts of lesser nobles and knights. They're the second-born sons. This is why feudalism worked, because people needed land, because only a small portion actually inherited it and got it. Plus, we need to think about this. We have a whole class of people, our lesser nobility, our knights, that have been training their entire life for war. And if there's not a war to do, they might start twiddling their thumbs, get a little bored, and start attacking things near where they are. This gave them an outlet for the violent tendencies that they had. Plus, the fact that many of them wanted land of their own, it made sense for them to put their skills to use. Also, of course, merchants saw the opportunity to get great wealth from the trade. The East was filled with materials and things that people in the West couldn't even imagine. Spices, so your food wouldn't taste bland. Silk, cotton, things that actually made your clothes comfortable. So merchants saw an opportunity to make a lot of money off of this venture. So how does this start? It starts in 1095, one of the few dates you need to remember for me, where Pope Urban II calls Christian to arms. He says we must go and have a crusade. And here's the kicker. If you took the Pope up on this offer, you would get salvation. That's right, straight ticket to heaven. It does not matter how bad or cruel or mean you were beforehand, you would get to go to heaven. And all you really have to do when taking up the cross is visit a church. I mean, how easy is that going to be? Yes, it's a long distance. You hop on your horse, you ride all the way down, and there you go. You have your instant salvation no matter what you have done. Now, of course, along the way, you might have to do some slicing and dicing. And of course, to reinforce this, the Pope said it is God's will that Christians rule Jerusalem and not somebody else. So, what is this Holy Land we've been referring to? Well, it's present day Israel and Palestine. And this is where we have the stories of the Old Testament, the Bible, many of the Quran in there. By the way, this is probably one you should have right for the indented that Israel and Palestine is the Holy Land. My apologies for that. We see it over here in the purple on there. That shows the Crusader states. It doesn't matter. The purple along the Mediterranean coast, that's what we're talking about, the Holy Land. So, these Crusades, we're going to go through this quickly. If I were you, I would write this first bullet right here that the Crusades were a series of wars between Christians and Muslims to control the Holy Land. Honestly, we don't need to worry about the People's Crusades. So I wouldn't go and write that. We know the Crusades are going to last a long time, over 200 years, almost 200 years. And a lot of people are going to take part in it. One thing a lot of people don't realize is that this wasn't actually just a military excursion. I mean, there's even going to be a children's crusade for Pete's. Not everyone going was a warrior. The most notable example of this is the People's Crusade. Like I said, you don't have to write this. We have a man named Peter the Hermit who leads a huge group of civilians to the Holy Land, where, of course, because they're not an army, they are quickly massacred by the Seljuk Turks. The Byzantine emperor begged them, don't go, don't go. But they did, and most of them were killed for it. One thing to note during the People's Crusade, it really starts a terrible streak of anti-Semitism during the Crusades. Originally, the Crusades were supposed to be holy wars between Christians and Muslims. However, Christians, as they were traveling to the Holy Land, they said, you know what, there are people here that aren't Christian either. And along the way, particularly in present-day Germany, many Jewish people were robbed, killed um, during these travels. A real sad point in European. Now, so our first crusade. So what happens for the first crusade is we're going to have several Christian armies going, traveling together, and then meeting together at Constantinople to join forces and then conquer the Seljuk. That's the game plan. One of the things that happens is the Byzantine Emperor Alexius Comnenus I, he goes and tries to get each of these crusaders to swear fealty, to loyalty to them. And unfortunately for the Crusaders, Hugh is going to be the one who does that. Baldwin very much wanted to go get some land. Raymond definitely seemed to be in it for pious reasons, really wanted to help out Christians. Bohemond was another one who's really into it for wealth and land. He actually just fought a war with the Byzantines. Um, Now, we have to realize when Alexius Comnenus I goes and says, hey, send some knights down to help me reconquer the Holy Land, he didn't mean to have all of these invading armies. He really wanted just a mercenary force. This time, the Byzantines primarily focused on using mercenaries for their military um, engagements, and this is definitely not what he asked for. So, Crusaders coming together, go reconquer Jerusalem. Let's see how they. This is just travel. We see two main points of people coming. Honestly, there are probably more lines than that, but they all converge at Constantinople, Jerusalem. We see they do make it to Jerusalem, which won't always be the case for Crusades. Now, this is going to be a fierce time of fighting. We have some fantastic stories that I wish I had more time to get into about this. At Nicaea, it looks like it's going to be a victory. The Crusaders are so excited to go do some looting and pillaging. Then there's trickery. The night before the big breaching of the Crusaders were able to go loot and pillage, the Byzantines snuck through and said, look, people are going to come in here, kill you, and steal all your stuff. Or you surrender to us right now, put up the Byzantine flags, and you'll be protected. The Byzantines succeed in convincing the city of Nicaea to surrender, and the Christians in the morning are furious. this point, the Byzantine Western Catholic alliance falls apart. Now, at Antioch, we have another huge siege. This time, the Catholics are not getting any help from the Byzantines. They wind up breaching the walls of the city. Unfortunately, they wind up massacring many of the people who live there, which, ironically, were Christians and not Muslims. Um, but then after this, a siege is when you don't let anyone in or out for a long period of time. The food had run out in the city, and when the Christians had broken through, they didn't realize that messenger pigeons had gone through, and the next day a huge Muslim army is outside of the gates. Now, besiegers are being besieged. It's looking very dire. But then a man has a vision that the lance that pierced Christ was buried under a church. No, it sounds far-fetched. I wasn't there. I can't speak to the veracity. So he and his friends, they start digging, digging, digging in the church. They find nothing. The man is downcast. He can't believe that his vision was wrong. Well, he says, let me try a little bit longer. And I don't know if he went and just threw a spearhead down on the ground and said, I found it, Eureka! Or if he really dug and then found it. But they believed they had the lance that pierced Christ. Now, if you remember, when we went to the Walters in the fall, the reliquary boxes held relics of the Christian past. And something like this was believed to have holy power to it. So the Christians, so excited to have the lance that pierced Christ, they form up for battle. They fasted, meaning they didn't eat before the battle. Then, as they fought the armies, they saw visions of the Crusaders that had fallen in previous battles fighting alongside them. And miraculously, Christians win the battle. At this point, Christians are feeling great. They continue on. Baldwin, one of our original Crusaders, leaves, winds up going to the kingdom of Edessa. He convinces the heirless king, meaning he didn't have someone to take over after him, to make his adopted son. Very strange ceremony where they wore like a purse and shirt. And then that king miraculously and mysteriously just happens to fall out his window not long after that. And Baldwin becomes the ruler of Edessa. I'm sure there was nothing suspicious about it at all. But 1099, we have the climax of the First Crusade. The Crusaders reach and capture Jerusalem. Here's the unfortunate thing. We have a massacre of the Jews and Muslims in the city. They said the blood went to the people's knees as they walked through the streets. It's a horrible, horrible sight. And that is how our First Crusade ends. Pope Urban II died not long before the climax of the First Crusade. He never knows what effect happens due to his call to crusade. But that's that for our Christian Crusaders in the First Crusade. Jerusalem is conquered. Will this be the end of the story? Oh, it most certainly will not. Here's just some art. Isn't that lovely? Head being catapulted in the city. Yeah, they would do that sort of thing. Think about psychological warfare like we talked about the Mongols. How great would you feel if you saw one of your friends hurled through the air at you? Antioch, similar. We have a massacre, of course, terrible, terrible destruction and bloodshed. And of course, Jerusalem. We see the fire, we see the violence. A terrible, terrible moment in human history. Stay tuned for part 2.